Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video we're taking a first look at a brand new Shadow Pokemon in the world of Pokemon Go, Shadow Corviknight. Now the regular Corviknight has already been a strong anti-meta to meta pick for several seasons now, so I'm very excited to see what the Shadow can do. Now the Shadow is obviously going to have a lot less bulk than the regular, but there are some intriguing sand attack breakpoints in several matchups. For example, battling against Carbink, Mimikyu, or Diggersby, the regular Corviknight only does 1 damage per sand attack, but the Shadow does 2, doubling your fast move damage. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches. And in game number 1, we pick up a pretty rough lead, leading Primeape into Tinkaton. I throw 1 Karate Chop save switch into Shadow Corviknight, and my opponent responds with Shadow Altaria. Now, the matchup against Altaria is one that should be improved when both are Shadow, and that's just because Corviknight has way more damage output. I fire off the Air Cutter, I am able to get the attack boost, and now I actually think I can pick up the knockout with Payback. My opponent full sends the Flamethrower, I farm up to the back-to-back Air Cutters, and I decide to go for the bait. Hoping my opponent will put up the shield, but they will not. But look at the amount of damage Shadow Air Cutter does at +1. Air Cutter feels like a very real move suddenly. I'm going to look to farm up, switch out, and get the catch and sneak onto the Stunfisk. This is going to save my Corviknight with a decent amount of energy and a lot of health, and my opponent reveals their final Pokemon, which is going to be Mimikyu. I'm always going to fire off the cheaper Discharge just to break the disguise, because once the disguise is busted, then suddenly I'm going to have way more damage output into this Pokemon. Mimikyu can fire off Play Rough. It's going to be close whether it knocks out or not. Play Rough connects. My Stunfisk is barely able to hang on 1 HP and a Dream, and I'm able to make the Mud Bomb. Mud Bomb is going to put the Mimikyu pretty low, and now I can look to bring in the Primeape. I'm just going to look to CMP tie Mimikyu here, and my opponent makes an amazing catch onto Altaria. So I will go for an undercharge, only hitting a few bubbles. That's going to let me get the Karate Chop down of Altaria and exit with the Rage Fist loaded once again. I'm at +1 attack. Back in comes the Tinkaton. I fire off the +1 Rage Fist. My opponent is going to be no shielding, but that's some very valuable damage onto the Tinkaton. This is only a Bulldoze. Primeape is a very glassy Pokemon, but I can survive a Bulldoze. They do get the debuff, but it's not enough for them to farm down. That's going to let me make a +2 Rage Fist. That's going to pressure a shield. And now it's time. In comes Corviknight. Mimikyu does have a Shadow Sneak loaded, so I cannot put up the shield. Gigaton Hammer connects. That's huge damage. I look to overfarm. My opponent pivots into the Mimikyu, and I fire off Air Cutter. Air Cutter will be taking the knockout here. Mimikyu gets KO'd. Back in comes the Tinkaton, and I'm able to make the payback. So right off the bat in game number 1, Shadow Corviknight put on an absolute clinic. The Shadow Corviknight for Shadow Ult matchup, if you're up energy as the Corviknight, honestly didn't feel bad whatsoever. We pick up a pretty nice lead in the next match, leading Primeape into Mimikyu. I'm going to fire off the Rage Fists as soon as I get them, and my opponent will put up the shield. By shielding, they keep their defense stat intact, as the disguise is still yet to be broken. My opponent does overfarm too much, playing to a CMP tie that they do not win, and my opponent's going to be doubling down, double shielding the Mimikyu. Now this is where things could get a little bit scary, because I'm taking a lot of fast move damage on the Primeape. I make the Rage Fist, I make a nice catch onto Licky Licky. This is a double resisted catch, but what I should be able to do is just rebank the Rage Fist for later, and then bring in Stunfisk. I did debate catching onto the Corviknight, but I want to try and save the Shadow Corviknight because it's very, very fast to get to charge stacks, and I could use that to potentially break the disguise on Mimikyu later on. My opponent just wants to lock in damage. I'm very okay no-shielding the Shadow Ball, and I think I will be able to knock out here with the double discharge. Mud Bomb would never be enough to secure the knockout, so double discharge is going to be the better path. I'm going to throw 2 in the move, just so that way I can exit with as much residual energy as I can possibly get. Licky Licky is going to fall. My opponent could send back in that Mimikyu. They still do have that disguise intact, and that's exactly what they're going to do. I'm just going to let the Stunfisk go at this point. Stunfisk has definitely done its job. Shadow Sneak connects. I cannot survive that Shadow Claw, and now I just bring in the Corviknight. Here, I accidentally throw 10 sand attacks instead of 9 and played to a CMP tie that I do not win. That's a pretty big error by me. I definitely should have done 9 sand attacks there so I could have outpaced. I mean, either way, I still had to break the disguise, so it's not like Mimikyu would have been knocked out. Mimikyu now at -1 defense, and this Air Cutter should actually take the KO if I'm not mistaken. I fire off Air Cutter. Mimikyu just gets knocked out. In the back is Tinkaton, and this is going to be close. Tinkaton approaching Gigaton Hammer, and I'm able to get the CMP sack swap. The camera was a little bit weird there on the CMP sack swap. That's something they're going to have to iron out. But we win charge attack priority, we get the Rage Fist, and we catch the Gigaton Hammer. Now I can just bring back in the Corviknight, and look how much damage the Shadow Air Cutter does on a Tinkaton. I fire off the Air Cutter. That actually does quite a bit. And now I'm able to make the payback, and I believe this payback should just about take the knockout. They may hang on with like 1 HP remaining, but I can sand attack down and get the win. I am really enjoying the shadow damage output here from the Corviknight. Picking up a pretty rough lead in the next match. Primeape into Malamar, I safe switch into Shadow Corviknight, and I will actually put up the shield. As the regular Corviknight, I would probably not shield there, but as the Shadow, a superpower would kind of destroy me, so I'm forced to put up the shield, and my opponent's going to pivot and bring in their own Corviknight. Payback does do a lot in the mirror, and that means that I know if my payback did that much damage to them, I'm going to be taking huge damage here. However, I can look to overfarm, fire off the payback, and my opponent's going to get knocked out here unless they look to match shields. They decide to let it go, and I'm able to win switch advantage. Getting switch is really nice. My Primeape is not going to have to deal with the Malamar anymore. In comes Malamar. I throw 9 sand attacks and the air cutter, getting this damage right before they're able to make the move. Air cutter will be no shielded. Malamar looks for the farm down, but on the new system, damage registration error is guaranteed. So I'm able to make a second air cutter, and that forces the shield. Getting shield parity back is so incredibly important because their energy doesn't really do a lot to the Stunfisk. So, even though they have so much energy, Stunfisk is more than happy to take a foul play plus superpower. There's the superpower right on cue. They pivot out. In the back is Lapras, and I'm going to be firing off Discharge. Discharge will do some pretty nice damage onto the Lapras. Lapras no shields, and I pivot into the Primeape. My opponent will barely be able to outpace, reaching the 12th Psywave 1 turn before I get the Rage Fist. I shield up the Sparkling Aria, I immediately undertap, and this puts my opponent at 1 residual Psywave. This means they are 10 Psywaves away from their Aria, so I can throw 5 Karate Chops, CMP tie Rage Fist to the Sparkling Aria, and by overfarming as much as I did versus the Lapras, I should actually be able to survive the Psywaves versus the Malamar, make it to the Rage Fist, and get the win. So even despite a pretty rough lead, we were able to make that last second air cutter getting the shield back, and once we were no longer at a shield disadvantage, then we were actually able to get the win. We move to the next match, leading Primeape into a Shadow Jumpluff. Now this is a pretty big core breaker for this team, but luckily this is the reason why I have Ice Punch on the Primeape. My opponent's going to overfarm a ton of energy. It looks like they're pretty comfortable going for a double shield or just taking monster damage onto that Jumpluff. I decide that I'm going to be doubling down here on the Primeape. I feel very comfortable shielding energy balls. I just want to get as much value out of the Primeape as I can possibly get. So I'm going to end up double shielding as they fire off the back-to-back energy balls. In comes a Shadow Malamar, I bank a Rage Fist for later, and in comes Stunfisk. Stunfisk again is the damage sponge of this team. I kind of just throw Stunfisk in matchups where I don't really know where else to take the damage. I get to fire off Mud Bomb. Mud Bomb's going to do some pretty nice damage onto the Shadow Malamar and put them low. My opponent, if they go for a superpower, I probably get Psywave down, but they go for a foul play. Foul play's not going to cut it. I'm able to hang on and make the last second Mud Bomb, and this should be knocking them out. But my opponent says no. They put up the shield. They pivot out. They send in a Shadow Alolan Sandslash, and now I'm going to bring in the Primeape. Instant Rage Fist. I need to boost up my Karate Chops as much as I possibly can. These boosted Karate Chops are shredding to the Sandslash, and now the question is, can I get the Sand Attack down? Ice Punch takes the KO. I bring in the Shadow Corviknight. Sand attacks are adding up, but I don't think I could have got it. So instead, I fire off the Air Cutter right before they're able to make their Ice Punch. Air Cutter will take the knockout. I don't have any energy on the Corviknight, and that could be a problem as Shadow Malamar re-hits the field. My opponent's win con in this moment is getting a catch onto the Jumpluff. I'm going to try and overfarm to not let that happen. So I overfarm, and they get the game-winning catch anyway. What a soul read from my opponent. That's just an amazing, amazing play. Even with the undercharge, it still KOs, and Malamar is able to survive the boosted sand attacks to make the foul play, knock out the Corviknight, and win the game. What an incredible read from my opponent. We move to the next match, leading Primeape into a non-Shadow Quagsire. I farm up, baiting a close combat, but even if it was a close combat, regular Quagsire would not get knocked out, so my opponent's not going to fall for it, and they're not going to put up the shield. I'm always okay absorbing energy here. They end up going for the Aqua Tail, and I don't throw my Rage Fist right away. This is by design, because the +1 Rage Fist would not have knocked out yet. I just want to Karate Chop them into a range where the Rage Fist would actually KO, and my opponent saves the Quagsire and sends in Mimikyu. Mimikyu will immediately shield as I go for the Rage Fist. I fire off Rage Fist number 2, and if they end up double shielding, then I'm just going to pivot into the Corviknight and fire off an immediate Air Cutter to break the disguise. As I click the Air Cutter, I realize I don't actually have to hit the bubbles, because it's going to break the disguise. It's only going to do 1 damage anyway, so there's not really a point in charging up the bubbles there. My opponent is now debuffed. I know that my Air Cutter can't quite knock out from here. I'm going to be no shielding as they fire off Shadow Sneak, and that does do a lot of damage. My opponent makes a very nice catch as they're able to send back in the Quagsire. Quagsire will still take quite a lot of damage from the air cutter. I get the boost, and they're going to fire off an Aqua Tail to deny my energy. This, however, will set up the Primeape. Because Primeape takes basically no damage from Mud Shot, I'm able to exit with an entire Rage Fist loaded. And if they bring in the Mimikyu, I'm going to win charge attack priority. They bring in the Mimikyu, I click the Rage Fist, and their disguise is already broken, so I'm pretty sure this just knocks out. It does. Mimikyu gets KO'd, in the back is Licky Licky, and my opponent just ends up stopping tapping there, as they realize there's a Primeape, there's a Stunfisk, both those Pokemon are up a shield, and there's just nothing that they can do. I believe after I end up throwing the second Mud Bomb, my opponent does eventually end up top lefting, but they just kind of sat there for a moment, let me fire off a bunch of charge attacks, and there's the top left, right before I'm able to make Mud Bomb number 3. We move to the next game, Primeape into a Shadow Shiny Corviknight. Now that is an incredibly cool flex. I try for the Air Cutter catch, I do not get it. My opponent's going to send in Shadow Quagsire, and let's see how much damage a Shadow Aqua Tail does. Now, I actually have a very good Shadow Corviknight. I went out at 5 a.m. to hunt grunts, and unfortunately, the flying grunts were few and far between. However, on only my second flying grunt, I was able to get this insanely good Rookie D. So I figured, well, that's probably enough grinding grunts for today. So I ended up heading back home, building it, using an Elite TM to get Air Cutter, and doing these battles here. Unfortunately, I didn't get the boost on the first Air Cutter. My opponent makes a very nice bait call, and they pivot back in their own Corviknight. I believe this is enough for a payback, or at least it was close enough that my tired brain didn't want to risk it, so I bank a ton of energy on my Corviknight, and now I send in the Stunfisk. And the fact that my opponent already had a payback here tells me they did have enough of the payback there, so it turns out that my internal clock of them having energy ended up being accurate. I fire off Discharge, they put up the shield, I'm going to make Discharge number 2, and that's going to force energy. They can't knock me out with an Air Cutter here. Even as the Shadow, they're going to have to full send the Payback. Payback is going to take the KO. I can bring in the Primeape, and my opponent reveals their final Pokemon is going to be Shadow Drapion. Instant Ice Punch from the Primeape does some very nice damage. My opponent will throw Aqua Tail, but I think I can finish this game with the Shadow Corviknight. I saved so much energy from earlier in the game. I can pivot into the Corviknight, farm to 100, and let's knock out Drapion with the Shadow Air Cutter. So I fire off the Air Cutter, Drapion is going to fall. And now, what's my opponent going to do? I have way too much energy on this Shadow Corviknight. They're waiting down the timer. Timer hits 0. They bring in the Shadow Corviknight, but I can just go for the Payback. Payback's always going to be guaranteed to take the knockout here. This is Shadow versus Shadow. Corviknight's going to fall. Back in comes the Quagsire. I'm able to make the Air Cutter as well. And dude, Shadow Corviknight is just fun. Air Cutter KOs the Quagsire, and that's a good game. Primeape versus Credillia in the next match, a very good lead, and the Credillia is not switching out. The one uncomfortable thing about this matchup is that if you don't have close combat, you actually end up losing the zeros because the Grass Knot does so much damage. So I'm able to land the Ice Punch, but I don't really want to take the Grass Knot, so I'm going to invest the shield and look to fully farm down. My opponent's going to pivot out. They send in Fearow. I'm going to fire off the Ice Punch. I need to get the shield back before I send in the Shadow Corviknight. Additionally, I'm hoping that the few Karate Chops that I landed will put them in a Shadow Payback range. Normally, Payback, it does a decent amount to Fearow, but it doesn't one-shot or anything. I'm hoping the Shadow will be able to one-shot. Well, moment of truth. Does this one-shot of Fearow that's taking just a little bit of damage? Payback lands. Oh, they just survive. That is a little bit tragic. They're going to get another Drill Peck onto the Shadow Corviknight. Shadow Corviknight now very low. My opponent pivots into the Shadow Dusknoir, and I'm able to throw 8 Sand Attacks and the Air Cutter. I do really appreciate the fact that the damage registration error is so consistent on the new system. We're probably going to have to come up with a new name for it now that it's the intended behavior, but I don't really know what else to call it. The only other term for it was new mechanic, and I feel like it's been around for a while, so new mechanic might not be the best name for it. So if anyone has any suggestions, let me know as to what we should call that mechanic. Maybe we go back to calling it new mechanic again because it is now the intended behavior on the new system. It is no longer considered an error. My opponent pivots into Credillia. I sent in the Primeape, but now it's them who gets the damage registration error. So I benefited from it in the Dusknoir matchup. They now benefit from it in the Credillia matchup. We're able to pressure away my final shield, but if they bring in the Dusknoir, I can always throw one Karate Chop and the Rage Fist. This is because that Astonish is never actually going to land onto the Primeape. The damage temporarily shows as pending, but after I take the knockout, my health is back to normal. Back in comes the Fearow, we get the Karate Chop down, and we take the win. Hopping into the final match, Primeape into Kanto Ninetales. The fact that it's not the Shadow Ninetales is definitely better for me here. I fire off a first Rage Fist, my opponent actually puts up a shield, and I imagine that was just a misclick on their part. I've definitely been there before, where just on default, I end up shielding something, and then I go, wait, I did not mean to shield that, because obviously you don't want to end up shielding the first Rage Fist there. This matchup is either way, whether you shield the first or not, I believe it's winning for Primeape in the ones, just because they can't knock you out with an Energy Ball. Energy Ball does do more than Weather Ball, so they're able to get me pretty low, but regardless, in the ones, I should always be able to win it as the Primeape. So I'm able to win Switch, I'm pretty low, and my opponent sends in Licky Licky, but I'm able to bank a Rage Fist for later, send in the Shadow Corviknight, and look at the sand attacks. These sand attacks are adding up quite a bit on Licky Licky. Now, in return, Shadow Ball is going to do a ton of damage. Now, unfortunately, I don't think Payback would have quite KO'd from there. It would have been really close. I didn't want to risk it, so I put up the shield, and my opponent ends up baiting with the Body Slam. I farm up to 100 energy. I have Air Cutter plus Payback. I bait with the Air Cutter. I get the shield. I win Charge Attack priority, and this is going to be game over for the Licky Licky. Licky Licky gets knocked out by the Shadow Payback. In the back is going to be Mimikyu, and this game is over. I can launch Air Cutter. This is going to break the disguise. And then the Rage Fist that I saved on Primeape earlier in the game is going to become very, very impactful. I can bring in the Primeape. I'm on basically 1 HP, but I have that Rage Fist loaded. Rage Fist lands, devastating damage onto the Mimikyu, and then I can send in Stunfisk. The only thing Stunfisk ever did in these battles was be bulky, but hey, that's why it was on the team. They go for the Shadow Sneak, we get the Thunder Shock down, and that's a good game. All in all, for day 1 testing Shadow Corviknight, I feel like Shadow Corviknight ended up performing pretty well. It definitely feels like a pretty different Pokemon to the regular Corviknight, just in terms of the fact that you can't really use it as much as a damage sponge. However, it feels more like an offensive Pokemon, where Air Cutter, especially at +1, feels like a very real charge attack. It no longer becomes a Pokemon whose energy can be rendered just completely invalid by a bulky neutral matchup, but instead, it's a Pokemon that can actually hit back for pretty nice damage in those matchups. I do like the fact that there's some really nice matchups with the sand attack breakpoints. I mentioned it at the start. I believe it was Carbink, Cradilly, Mimikyu, and Diggersby. In those matchups, normally, Corviknight only does 1 damage per sand attack, but now does 2. And I believe the Diggersby matchup, as long as you're able to get an Air Cutter shielded, you're actually able to win the ones into Diggersby, Mudshot Diggersby even, just by virtue of the fact that you do 2 damage per sand attack, and that just adds up way more over the course of a matchup. I think there are very real drawbacks to the fact that it is no longer as effective of a defensive tank, but as long as you acknowledge the fact that it's a very different Pokemon, I do think it is surprisingly strong. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and an extra special thank you, as always, to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated. Thank you guys oh so very much, and until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.